This is the World Organic News for the week ending 11th of December 2017. John Moore reporting. This week we begin with alternative, or if you prefer, green energy. The blog Kevin's Walk on the Wild Side brings us the post. Yes, South Australia's battery is a massive battery, but it can do much more besides. Tesla has completed a huge battery for South Australia. Last year a storm ripped power lines from their supports and destroyed the supports, leaving the state with power outages. The Conservative federal government, the Liberal National Party coalition, leaders blame South Australia's reliance on wind power. I might point out here that fossil fuel, in particular the coal industry, donates huge sums of money to both the Liberals and the Nationals. To reconfirm for listeners outside Australia, the Liberal Party is a Conservative party, not Liberal in the left-wing sense. So following the brouhaha, Tesla offered to add a huge 100 megawatt hours of storage adjacent to the Hornsdale wind farm. While this battery will act as a backup in times of storm damage to the grid, it has other effects. Already, with rooftop solar panels on homes and businesses, South Australians are paying up to 10% less for their power than if they'd relied solely on coal. The connection between the Hornsdale battery and the wind farm means the wind power now becomes more economically viable, and to the naysayers who point to base load requirements, an ability to supply base load power when the wind isn't blowing. Given the falling costs of both solar and wind generation, and the falling costs of battery storage, even with lithium-ion batteries, the Conservative members of the Federal Parliament may just have created the answer to a problem they didn't think could be solved. As a further sign of the move to green power, the blog Financial Post brings us, Google is the biggest corporate buyer of clean power and keeps buying more. This seems to be an unstoppable change. Quote, Google has now agreed to buy 2,057 megawatts of clean power in the US and 2,846 megawatts overall. According to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, Amazon.com Inc. is the second largest corporate buyer with 1,219 megawatts, all in the US. With this deal, Google will be purchasing enough clean energy to match the energy consumption of its global operations, according to the statement. End quote. In much the same way an IBM executive in the 1950s said he could see a market worldwide for about 6 computers, and the Hollywood executive who saw television as a passing fad, we are witnessing the death of the fossil fuel generation of electricity. The South Australian battery story I would offer as evidence to support the Google and Amazon purchases. Once the baseload question is solved, and solved it will be, the move to renewables will take off exponentially. I see the future as much cleaner, both in terms of CO2 but also in visible air pollution terms. Moving from the air to the soil, we have a post from Running Wild. What's brown and magical? A fair question. I'm sure long-term listeners know where this is headed. We're talking topsoil. We often take topsoil for granted, always there and so on. Talk to anyone who's still alive and lived through the American Dust Bowl of the Depression years, or who was in the 1983 Melbourne dust storm. Soil treated with respect is always there, but mistreated, it goes walkabout. These two events were extreme examples of topsoil on the move. But, and I quote from the article, quote, soil isn't just there, a static immovable constant in our lives. In fact, our soils are in danger. They are disappearing at a rate that is alarming for future generations, with 2.2 million tonnes being lost and degraded in the UK each year. This is caused by factors such as expanding cities, transport infrastructure and pollution, either industrial or through the inefficient use of fertilisers. End quote. Tillage, the great breakthrough in agriculture, no pun intended, but I'll take it on this occasion, was the beginning of soil losses. Since the Second World War, the tillage has become industrialised beyond recognition. Farmers of the 1890s would be slack-jawed looking at the cultivation methods of the 1990s. Admittedly, there is a no-till movement which continues to gain ground. Oh, these puns keep dropping like good rains. I assure you they are all unintended. Of course, focusing on soil in isolation will never be the whole answer. The blog Drawdown brings us a post, Conservation Agriculture, a not-so-conservative tool against climate change. Quote, conservation agriculture is an approach to farming that seeks to increase food security, alleviate poverty, conserve biodiversity and safeguard ecosystem services. Conservation agriculture practices can also contribute to making agricultural systems more resilient to climate change. In many cases, conservation agriculture has been proven to reduce farming systems' greenhouse gas emissions and enhance their role as carbon sinks, end quote. I would recommend you follow this blog, Drawdown. It has great material and I'm sure it'll pop up on this podcast again. So the idea of conservation ag is a whole systems approach. Much of the work done by farmers in this system is observation. Once the basic structures are in place, the system is self-sustaining. The farmer's job, apart from collecting surpluses, is to observe and make corrections to maintain the balances. Things like knowing when to move stock onto new feeding grounds, the amount and timing of pruning of hedgerows, fruit trees and nut groves, the time to use sheep to collect windfall apples and give the ewes a nutritional bump prior to mating, when to run pigs through the woodland to collect fallen foods. The whole concept and application of conservation agriculture is not conservative in the political sense at all. It is the culmination of much work from such diverse fields as ecology, archaeology, chemistry, agronomy, and the application of this acquired knowledge through techniques like permaculture, biodynamics, various no-dig styles, and of course Masanobu Fukuoka's natural farming. Clearly the way forward in clean energy is becoming clearer, so too in the soil carbon-saving ways of conservation farming. For the latter to take off in the same way rooftop solar panels have, we need price signals driving both farmers and consumers towards the conservation of farming approach. Removing subsidies on industrial ag would be a good start. I can't recall the exact figures from the film King Corn, but without subsidies, the cost of producing corn in the American Corn Belt was something like $7 an acre greater than the return without the subsidy. Remove the subsidy and you will see the area under corn cultivation shrink remarkably, leaving the land available for more sustainable systems. The subsidies could then be applied to a different metric. Instead of paying for production of outputs, subsidies could be paid for those who increase topsoil depths. It's a thought. And with that thought, I'll finish for this week. A transcript of the episode is available at worldorganicnews.com, link in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back at the same time next week.